Blood Brothers, a short story by Paige Gordon. This is the author. Sheriff Brown had been shot and killed in cold blood. Everyone in South Fork knew that. Everyone in South Fork also knew who'd done it, but not one of them would ever say. Not one of them except for you, Johnson McCray. You damnable fool. The soft tears filling the widow's eyes belied the harsh whispers consuming her thoughts. As the echoes of those thoughts faded, a high mountain breeze rustled the leaves of the aspen grove which the town cemetery had accidentally been placed beside. Accidentally, because back when the town was nothing more than a collection of three families gritting their teeth through the harshest winter in living memory, the young Mrs. Smith had died during childbirth, her fifth, and the south-facing hillside covered in aspen skeletons had been the only piece of ground sufficiently thawed to accommodate digging a grave. And so, all those years ago, a cemetery had been born, if such a word can be used to describe such a place. Then, a month ago, Sheriff Brown had been laid to rest beside a mother who was not his own, and today the body of Johnson McCray was being added to the makeshift family whose members were related only by the lack of warm blood flowing through their veins. Trouble had come to South Fork towards the end of summer, and Trouble had a name, Clinton Barnes. First, he harassed the saloon girls, grabbing and hollering, making lewd comments, and generally acting like a rut-crazed animal. A few men stepped up to defend the honor of the ladies, but they were rewarded with black eyes, missing teeth, and in one case, a broken left arm. Each time, Sheriff Brown would take Clinton to the jail, lock him up for the night, and then release him in the morning after a stern warning. But the warnings did no good. Clinton had indulged his desire for whiskey and women one too many times. He longed to taste the forbidden fruit, and finally came to a point on the road of his life where there was simply no turning back. That was the night everything changed in South Fork. It was Ed Murdoch who found her. He was the owner of the livery stable, and during the night he heard the horses nervously stirring about and went to investigate. In the muted glow of the lantern light, he saw a body, a young girl. Her nightgown was in tatters, her face black and blue, dark stains of blood covering her tender chest and exposed legs. He knelt down and felt for a pulse, barely recognizing the face of Reverend Smith's youngest daughter, Rachel. Within minutes, the town was awakened to cries for both the doctor and the sheriff. One began immediately tending to the victim, while the other set off in search of the only man in town wicked enough to commit such a crime. In the dead of night, 3 gunshots rent the silence, reverberating out across the lonely mountains, until at long last they were lost among the sighing of the pines. By the time a group of townsmen made their way from the livery stable to the north end of town, Sheriff Brown was already dead. Clinton Barnes was kneeling over him, bloody hands pressed against a gaping wound in the sheriff's chest. "He went that way!" The men glanced from one to another, confusion stalling their thoughts and freezing them momentarily in indecision. "The man who shot the sheriff! He went that way! Go get him, you fools!" The commanding tone of Clinton's voice sparked a primal desire in the men of the town, a desire to be led, to be followers, to not be the one on whom the yoke of responsibility laid its weight. "After him!" And so they ran. In the depths of their hearts, they knew they were chasing a phantom, a myth, a lie. But it was a lie agreed upon, and so they ran, eyes piercing the darkness, searching for an apparition they knew would never appear. Like the inexorable beat of a metronome, they would call out to each other, each man desperately seeking reassurances that he was not alone, wandering through the labyrinth of his lies. And in the fading light of their lanterns, as darkness crept over his face like the pale of a deadly plague, Clinton Barnes smiled the smile of a devil. The blood of the girl had been easily covered by the blood of the do-gooder sheriff, and the men of the town had been as easy to coerce as the sheep that he'd always known they were. None of them would question him. None of them would defy him. South Fork was his now. And so it was. For the next month, the lies they held in their hearts wreaked havoc on the men of the town. Their courage waned, their backs bowed, their hands shook. They spoke only in whispers, and in the dead of night they prayed silently for someone to right the wrongs which they had been party to. They were men who had lost, or worse, men who had never found, their courage. Men timid as sheep, constantly haunted by the specter of a wolf they had invited into their fold. And as is true of sheep, so it is often true of men. To a sheep, the wolf and the shepherd dog look frighteningly like blood brothers. It was midday when the sheepdog came to town. He stood, silent and shadowless, at the head of the street, his eyes shifting side to side as he waited patiently. Finally, his master spoke. "Dog, come." As the buckskin's hooves plodded along the dusty street, Dog stayed close to his master's side, his senses on high alert, taking in every detail of the tiny frontier town. A tall man rode atop the buckskin, his weathered hand resting easy on a well-oiled rig by his side, his watchful, roaming eyes contrasting sharply with his relaxed posture. The man had a sort of sixth sense, a kind of primal, animal instinct, brought about by a lifetime spent with danger as a bedfellow, and as he traversed the street, he felt a tension in the town so thick he could have cut it with the bowie strapped to the small of his back. In front of the saloon, he watered the buckskin, and after making a show of wrapping the reins around the hitching post, that horse wouldn't move a damn inch unless he told him to, and then issuing a murmured, "Dog, stay," he strode up the creaking steps and crossed over the threshold into what he felt in his bones would be a bloody afternoon. Rachel Smith, Sheriff Brown, Johnson McCray. After introducing himself to a man who turned out to be Ed Murdoch, the livery stable owner, Chance was able to glean the gist of the ghastly events in the town's recent past. Now he sat quietly, contemplating the situation, while sipping 2 fingers' worth of tolerably decent whiskey. The source of the tension he'd felt upon entering the town was now clearly visible to him. It sat across the room and was staring at Chance the way one predator glares at another who has chosen to meander a little too close to a fresh kill. Chance simply stared back. Eventually, Clinton Barnes pushed himself back from his table, strode through the wilderness of chairs separating them, and seated himself directly in front of Chance. "Who are you?" Chance raised the glass in a mock salute and answered softly as he brought it to his lips. "Just passing through." "Well, get to passing then. We don't want no trouble." Barnes stared. Chance stared back, unblinking. "I don't plan on starting any trouble." Barnes nodded his head as he rose to leave. "Good. But I'm happy to finish any, if the need arises." Barnes froze, his body turned halfway back from a now botched retreat. Chance noted the man's right shoulder loosen, his gun hand lowering ever so slightly towards the worn handle of a Colt, which Chance was sure had taken more than one innocent life. "What's that supposed to mean?" Barnes growled. Chance smiled. "Exactly what it sounds like. I don't plan on stirring anything up with anyone, but this town stinks to high heaven, and if something needs doing, that's just been waiting on the right man to do it." Barnes glared. Chance leaned back in his chair. "Is there something wrong, Barnes?" The outlaw's hand twitched. Chance's hand seemed to be carved from marble. "How do you know my name?" "Everyone here knows your name, Barnes. You're the talk of the town." "Well, if you know what's good for you, you'll forget it. And you'll forget we ever met. And you'll forget this whole damn town. We don't want no trouble." "No trouble, Barnes. Remember, just passing through." "Well, get to passing then," Barnes said. He walked away without so much as a glance back at the stranger. In that moment, Chance knew without a doubt that the next time he stood face to face with Clinton Barnes, one of them was going to meet his maker. "He just couldn't keep his mouth shut, the damnable fool." The soft tears filling the widow's eyes belied the harsh words of her confession to a man who was essentially a complete stranger. In the back of her mind, the widow McCray wondered why she trusted this man, why she had let him into her home, why she had told him anything at all, much less why she had felt safe enough to allow the cracks of her heart to split open and the whole mournful story to come gushing out amidst poorly suppressed sobs. But she had. She had told the stranger the whole story, and now she sat silently, staring off into an unknown distance, an unknown future, devoid of the man she'd promised her entire future to. She sat, consumed by fear and loneliness, anguish and anger, sorrow and regret. And yet, in the presence of this stranger, Chance he called himself, she somehow felt safe to be who she was, exactly who she was at that moment, broken, grieving, vulnerable. She sensed the potential for violence in him the moment she laid eyes on him, but she'd known innately that it would never be directed at her. Counterbalancing the violence that flowed beneath the rawhide surface of the man was a gentleness that seemed to emanate from some hidden core within him. A gentleness that the widow McCray felt but could never describe. A gentleness that could only ever be felt by those in need of it. He had hardly spoken a word during her story. Nodding slowly, his eyes full of compassion, he'd simply sat, his presence keeping the demons at bay long enough for her to fall apart, and then, slowly, to begin to fit the pieces of herself back together again. She had no clue how much time had passed before he spoke. "Mrs. McCray, there's nothing I can do to bring him back. I wish there was, but he's with the Lord now, and there is only one man's ever come back from that. And as good a man as your husband was, I still reckon he won't qualify to be the second." The widow McCray laughed softly in spite of the pain. "No, I very much doubt that." Chance was silent another moment and watched the smile that had never quite reached the widow's eyes fade from her sallow cheeks. "Ma'am, although I can't bring your husband back, there is something I can do, but only if you approve of it. Only if you know the cost and feel that, despite that, it is what needs doing. I'm never one to start trouble, ma'am, but if there's something that needs doing, I am the man to do it." The widow was silent. At long last, she spoke. As Chance rode away, little Johnny came out from behind the blanket which cordoned off a sleeping area that would never again stand guard around the dreams of a whole family. He stepped out the front door and watched the stranger ride directly into the late afternoon sun, his course appearing as inexorable as the journey of that ball of fire itself. A haze in the air caused his image to vibrate with a preternatural energy, and he appeared to the boy as something more than a man, a force of nature, an unstoppable reality, as solid and concrete, and yet as ethereal and fleeting as the images in the boy's mind of heaven itself. Or hell. Either one, really. "You sure you're willing to die for her, mister?" Clinton Barnes had alcohol in his breath, fury in his eyes, and ice in his veins. He stood barely more than an arm's length away from a stranger who just explained how he, the stranger, was going to kill him, Clinton Barnes, the man who owned the town, the man who took whatever and whomever he wanted, the man who'd gotten away with murder, not just once, but 3 times. Now this tall, unassuming stranger with his buckskin horse and his dog named Dog had just calmly described exactly how the last moments of Clinton Barnes's life would play out. Chance had ridden back into town down the same road he'd used that morning, simply because it was the only road into or out of this desolate place. He'd wrapped the same rein around the same hitching rail, ascended the same creaking steps, and crossed the same threshold, simply because he knew that was the place he would find Clinton Barnes. He stood in the doorway for only a second, his sharp eyes taking in every detail of the smoky room, before locking on to the table where Barnes sat. Barnes had his back to the wall, just as Chance knew he would, and Chance could not help but be grateful for the outlaw's choice. It meant that, conveniently, there were no innocents behind him who would run the risk of injury if Chance's round traveled all the way through the devil. Chance was not worried about innocents being hit by any rounds Barnes would attempt to sling at him. He strode to the table, pulled out a chair, and sat down directly across from the man who held an entire town under his thumb. As he sat, Barnes sneered. "You said you were leaving." "I am." "Well, you ain't gone yet. Why?" "I came across something that needed doing." Chance's eyes blazed with hellfire as he peered mercilessly into the other man's soul. And for the first time in a long time, Clinton Barnes felt a tinge of real fear. "I know what you did, Barnes. I know what you did, and I know who you are. Not everything about who you are, but enough to know that you're a thing that needs doing. And no one else in this town will do it. No one else is willing. No one is brave or foolish enough to even attempt it. The only 2 men who were are both lying on that hilltop up yonder." As Chance spoke, the vague feeling of fear inside Barnes's gut became more clearly defined. In response, the outlaw threw back the last half of his whiskey in an attempt to bolster his courage. When the liquor landed, though, there was no courage to be found. Courage was not a trait a man like Clinton Barnes was likely to possess. Rage he had aplenty. Courage, not so much. But whiskey is not a fickle beast, and it delights to stir up any fire it finds already raging in the soul of man. So Clinton Barnes's rage was lit, and he slammed his hands on the table as he stood roughly, shoving his chair back and into the wall behind him. "Why, you cocky son of a bitch, what makes you think you won't end up exactly like them other two? And what matter is it of yours in the first place? What are you hoping to get out of setting yourself against me, other than an early grave?" His eyes gleamed wickedly as Chance watched a thought form in his perverse mind and make its way free, flying on alcohol-laden wings out between his rotten teeth. "It's the widow, huh? Right fancy mare she is. You taken a liking to her, have you?" Before he could continue, Chance spoke. "No, Clinton, it's not because of the widow McCray. At least, not for any reason your twisted mind will conjure up. It is because of you. Solely because of you. It's because you're a snake. You prey on the weak, you poison the well for everyone else in the town, and you smother out the life of anyone who tries to stop you. You're a rabid wolf set loose among the calves, and there's only one thing to do with a creature like that." "And you think you're the man to do it?" "No." "No?" "No. I know I'm the man to do it, Barnes." And then Chance told Clinton Barnes, with all the fervor of a prophet of old speaking woe to a fallen people, exactly how his last minutes on earth would play out. Chance knew when Clinton was going to go for his gun long before the outlaw's hand ever moved. Not long, according to time, the way a privileged man's pocket watch would describe it, but an eternity, according to time as described by the flight of a .45, traversing over the scarred and pockmarked distance of a grimy saloon tabletop. By the time Barnes's fingers were wrapped around the worn smooth handle of his own piece, Chance's round had already implanted itself in the thick oak wall, and the boom of the report had already begun to fade into a high-pitched ringing in the ears of every living soul left inside what was now a makeshift, oversized coffin. Barnes stared at the tall stranger and watched him calmly eject the spent cartridge, load a fresh round from his belt, and holster his weapon. Chance stared at the outlaw as his body fitfully ejected its soon-to-be useless lifeblood, his hands smearing a fresh coat of paint across the surface of the table as he slumped over and slid to the ground. Walking around the table, Chance saw there was no need to check for a pulse. The devil had left Clinton Barnes's eyes. Chance was sure that Barnes had not left the devil's sight, though. Not for a minute. Careful to not get any more stains on it than necessary, Chance removed the outlaw's gun belt and slung it over his shoulder. Before leaving, he paid for the dead man's drink and left enough extra to cover the damages as well as a burial plot for Barnes, if you so choose. And with that, he crossed the threshold out into the fading evening sun, climbed aboard the ever-patient buckskin, and spoke softly. "Dog, come." "Is it finished?" The widow McCray stood in the doorway, her eyes red from crying, but her voice carrying the timbre of steel which resided in the heart of all women of the West. "Yes, ma'am, it is." Chance stood on the front porch, hat in hand. His eyes traveled down from the fierce blue of the mother's and found the exact same color in the eyes of the boy who would soon be taller than her. "Come here, son." Johnny straightened his back, stepped past his mother, and stood face to face with the most dangerous man he had ever known. The boy's knees shook slightly, and he fought with all his might to hold back the tears that threatened to burst his damned eyes any second. He sniffed and wiped a red nose with the back of his hand. Chance knelt before the boy and spoke softly. "Johnny, I know that nothing I do can ever bring your pa back. He's gone to meet his maker, and you won't see him again until the good Lord calls you home. So I want you to know that what I did was not just vengeance for your pa. It was about more than that. It was about making sure that Clinton Barnes wasn't able to cause any more harm in the future. The book says that vengeance is the Lord's, but protection, that's a man's duty. And I believe now I've done mine. But son, you are going to have to be the man of the house now, and you've got some big boots to fill. I know you might be tempted to think more highly of me for stopping Barnes than you do of your pa for only standing up to him. Might seem like if it only ended up getting him killed, what was the point? Is that about right?" A single tear escaped the prison of the boy's tender heart and gave the gunfighter all the answer he needed. "That's okay, Johnny. That's okay. But son, when a man's given the choice to either die for his principles or live without them, he really doesn't have a choice. There's only one path he can take and still be worthy of calling himself a man. Chance stood silent for a minute, studying Johnny as the boy wrestled with the responsibility he knew would soon be his to shoulder. And let me tell you something else. Mr. Jefferson stated that all men are created equal, and that is something I believe with all my heart. But just because we're created equal don't mean we all end up that way. When a boy's first born, sure, there ain't much difference between one and another. But give him time, and soon enough a grown boy will start to show his true colors. And ain't nobody living who doesn't have more of either the good Lord or the devil shining through his actions. God may have created all men equal, Johnny, but there's only one thing ensures they all stay that way. Chance slowly handed the boy the weapon that had been used to murder his father. Your father was a good man, Johnny. Don't you ever doubt that. He died for his principles, and if that is all a man accomplishes in his life, his family should be damned proud of him. He proved himself a man to the end. But life don't have to work with only these two options, and I don't believe it should. When it comes to my life, although I'm more than willing to die for my principles, I'd rather live for them and defend them against men who've decided they no longer want to have any. I can't say that it's right in the eyes of the good Lord, although I believe it is. And I certainly can't say that it's right for you. Each man must make his own decision. I made mine, your pa made his. And now, you have to make yours. Johnny stared at the weapon in his hands. He felt revulsion towards the weapon that had brought so much pain to him and his family. But his eyes drifted to the Colt strapped low on Chance's side. The two were nearly indistinguishable, like blood brothers. The weight of certainty settled into the young boy's soul, and the gunfighter saw the fire of resolve light in his eyes. Well, I can see you've made your choice. Remember this, though, son. To die for your principles is easier on you, but harder on those you love. After all, it don't take a man long to pass on from this world, but those you leave behind will have to live without you for the rest of their born days. To live for your principles, on the other hand, that's easier on those you love, because you're still around for them. But it's a whole world heavier on you. When you strap on that gun, you're taking the weight of the world on your shoulders. At some point, you're going to be the one who decides if an unprincipled man is going to meet his maker today or not. That should never be a decision you go looking for, or one you ever take lightly. The worst thing you can do to a man is send him to a maker he ain't prepared to meet yet. But if you must, do so without hesitation. Do so to protect the ones you love and any who can't protect themselves. You understand me, son?
Yes, sir.
Good. Chance tipped his hat to the widow McCray. Ma'am, I reckon I'll be going now. I apologize, there ain't much left I can do for you, but you got the makings of a fine young man here. You'll be all right. And without another word, he stepped off the porch, untied the buckskin, and stepped into the saddle. Dog, come. And with that, the buckskin, the dog named Dog, and the tall stranger rode off into the sunset, never once turning to look back. If he had, he may have just been able to glimpse a small trail of tears traveling silently down the face of a boy who was fast becoming a man.